We talk about the congestion at Chinese ports. How is that impacting operations at the Singapore port?
Well, as with the COVID situation during pandemic, we've seen port closures, we've seen delays in other ports. What Singapore tries to do as a global transshipment hub as well as a bunkering hub is to try as best as possible to be a catch-up port. So what do I mean by that? If we look at some statistics, about 1/3 of world's global container transshipped through Singapore, more than 80% of what we handle are actually transported through to the other 600 ports that we have around the world. So what we do is to try to increase our infrastructure, increase our resources to be able to handle more ships that are calling on our port which are unscheduled or off schedule.
You talked about playing catch-up. It does seem like container ships are trying to play catch-up by bypassing Singapore for refueling, and hence it's impacting Singapore's fuel sales. In fact, some data suggests that it's dropped to a 6-year low. Give us a sense of what you're seeing.
So I think there was one report which says that ships have been bypassing Singapore. Actually, that's not true. So even during the COVID time, let's say during the COVID crisis in 2021, we actually see our highest number of container ships. So actually ships call on Singapore for a variety of reasons, right? And most use Singapore as a one-stop. Why is it one-stop? Because we provide ship supply, we provide crew change, bunkering, and container. So when ships call on Singapore, they will do all this together, and then it helps them to save time. In fact, there are ships who have called on our ports during the past few months who are bypassing other ports so that they can do all these services together. So I think it's a lot of commercial considerations. If you look at our bunkering, it is actually a global trend, because when you look at bunkering numbers, generally the whole global bunkering demand has dropped, not just in our port, in quite a number of other ports as well, because they are now buying on spot because of the prices and watching out for the prices that's happening. So in a way, they are just buying what is needed. You don't have to fill the whole tank of the vessels, and therefore we see some of our numbers dropping compared to last quarter of it. We'll have to see how the commodity market and how the bunkering markets in terms of the prices move, and we hope that the situation will alleviate. Now, back on container itself, what we have done in Singapore is to actually open up more berth slots as well as recruited more individuals. So for example, in 2021, if you look at what PSA has been doing, we've opened up 8 berths in Keppel, we've opened up 2 more berths in Tuas. So in total, we have 10 berths in additional. We have also increased yard capacity by almost 6,700 TEUs to handle more container ships who are able to come here and move their containers and transship to other parts of the world. And PSA alone, they have recruited more than 3,600 frontline workers during the past 2 years. So we are looking at how we can continue to do that. But of course, the bigger solution that we all have to handle is actually greater digitalization to make the supply chain more efficient. I can talk more if you want to go into that.
Hey, Ley Hoon, yeah, maybe talk a bit more about that. I mean, how important is that? Hold on a second. We have to mark some moves here in the markets. Sorry about that, Ley Hoon. We're talking about the TAIEX now. We're falling about 2.5% here in Taipei. Basically, we are in correction territory for this market after falling 10% from the peak. It's really kind of the broad risk aversion that we're seeing at the moment. Ley Hoon, sorry, I didn't want to disrupt you just now. Before we talk about digital transformation, I have to ask you about the COVID situation in China right now and the lockdowns that we're seeing. How does that complicate the outlook for you?
Oh, well, for Singapore, we are one of the largest bunkering and transshipment port. As I mentioned earlier, we'll do our best to be a catch-up port. We probably will see more off-schedule or unscheduled vessels who want to call on the port of Singapore, or scheduling to other ports to try to move the containers, to try to get as much of the maritime services as possible. These include crew changes, which we have almost resumed to normal already in Singapore, ship supplies, bunkering. For Port of Singapore, I can't speak about China itself, but Port of Singapore, we have been doing contactless, remote. We have been carrying our port 24/7. So we'll do our best, and we know that in terms of our position, in terms of the global supply chain, and we serve as a critical node along the Straits of Malacca and Singapore. So PSA, for example, has been talking very closely with the shipping companies to see how we can help them get back on schedule, or at least help them to play catch-up. Similarly, for services that need to call in Singapore, we have the whole ecosystem who are ready to support any. But of course, course, having said that, there will be, I guess, in terms of moving forward, a little bit more disruption given China, given Ukraine, war in Ukraine as well. And as a whole shipping company and a shipping community, we have to brave for it. Among different ports, we have to collaborate, which is why I mentioned about digitalization, because global supply chain is still very much dependent on a whole array of many different players, right? You have your big companies, you have your small SMEs as well. I was told along the whole global supply chain, you have more than 18 touch points. How do you ensure that these 18 touch points, or more than the 18 touch points in future, are able to communicate more efficiently, such that, it's a bit like, if something go off schedule, you can quickly arrange and rearrange the services. And that is what we are doing in Singapore. So first, we have done Digital Port at SG, basically a one-stop port clearance. You don't have to go to many different agencies. And our next phase is actually just in time. Yeah.
So, do you see that there's more opportunities than challenges given these supply chain disruptions that you're seeing? What does this mean for overall Singapore's port, the outlook for that, and economic growth in ASEAN overall?
Yes, I would say that, in the Chinese saying goes, right, every crisis comes an opportunity. And in fact, actually, for shipping, for the past 2-3 years, unlike other sectors, we've been very resilient and we've been rebounding back. And it's a very, very resilient sector. In fact, for the past 2-3 years, we've seen a lot of transitions and transformations going on in terms of adopting digitalization as well as decarbonization. So we should make use of this opportunity to just continue push ahead. Digitalization, for example, how do we uplift our small and medium enterprises? We've done that through for example, our digitalization maritime playbook. How do you ensure that you actually introduce more electronic certificates, EBL, electronic bills of lading, electronics bunker delivery note? How do we ensure that electronic transaction is actually more worldwide adopted? So this is an area, a big potential area, which I think all of us have to move on, not just shipping, but across the whole global supply chain.
Ley Hoon, Bloomberg ran a story reporting that there's a growing number of ships being supplied with contaminated bunker fuel. Give us the status of that, and does the port intend to take action?
So we are still investigating on the case. We've heard from Glencore itself. So I think we need to give some time in terms of the investigation, and when it's ready, we'll be able to update the audience and yourself and the media on it. And we hope that the investigation will conclude very soon in terms of the source and in terms of how we're going to take remedy action. What is something which we are looking at is really to surface it and raise it to IMO to see whether we can introduce more of such testing in place.